In this overview, I'll discuss the new enterprise asset management solution on the ServiceNow platform. In this video, we'll talk about what is enterprise asset management, or as we call it, EAM, some of the functionalities that are coming out with the Tokyo release, and how this is going to be critical to managing your everyday business operations of your assets. So what is enterprise asset management? EAM, as we call it, is the end-to-end lifecycle management of an organization's most business critical assets. So from the planning of that asset to acquiring the equipment and deploying that asset out on site to ultimately retiring that asset. The intention here is to streamline the entire lifecycle of that asset to meet operational targets, maximize the usefulness of that asset, and ultimately minimize risk. So throughout the life cycle, you should be able to answer the questions of what assets do you own, what processes can you streamline, and how can you track where your assets are at in their life cycle, as well as being able to maximize the usefulness of that asset. So ServiceNow's enterprise asset management can help answer these questions and track the enterprise assets through their life cycle. Companies are starting to oversee a tremendous amount of physical assets, whether that is a medical cart, lab equipment, refrigerators, ATMs, forklifts, any kind of physical asset, you name it. When it comes to managing these enterprise assets, organizations really are looking to control the investments around these assets, reduce the operating expense, and also being able to track on the management of these assets. So in order to do that, an enterprise asset management solution like ServiceNow's is going to help improve enterprise-wide visibility into those assets across their lifecycle. Some of the challenges that we see customers come across is the lack of asset visibility across the enterprise. So with all of the assets sprawl, being able to track the asset lifecycle and also track from a user and location perspective where those assets are deployed is a major obstacle. Including that is inventory planning and risk exposure. So with supply chain disruptions and inventory planning, there's difficulties in terms of predicting the inventory needs to ensure that there's enough stock, but also without carrying excess inventory on the balance sheet. And last, most legacy systems that are used for EAM today are currently not built to integrate and scale with today's operations. So companies already have complex and challenging business processes. And so trying to utilize these legacy systems that require customization or are out of trend as a point solution tend to make it hard to solve an end-to-end asset management process. So ServiceNow's enterprise asset management is designed to improve the quality and performance of business assets across its entire life cycle. So with EAM, there are four main pillars of benefit here. First is driving transparency, reducing expenses, mitigating risk, and then optimizing on business processes. So with driving transparency, being able to track all of your enterprise assets across the organization and gaining visibility into granular details about that asset. Gaining transparency and visibility into these assets will also help minimize risk exposure. So being able to track all of the changes and details on an asset record, while also having an audit trail across that asset is going to help in documentation as we talk about compliance and regulations across governing bodies. You'll also be able to reduce the expenses. So gaining a link between financial and operational activities, understanding what assets you already own, and knowing how much in spend this enterprise assets composed of is going to help with improved decision-making and track assets more efficiently. And last, what we'll see is that automating the processes around the end-to-end enterprise asset lifecycle. So that is the planning, receiving, maintenance of an asset, disposal of an asset. This is all going to be optimized through the workflows on ServiceNow. utilizing asset management with other areas of the platform as well is really going to unlock a lot of value across your business processes. So now let's talk about some of the product capabilities on the Tokyo release for enterprise asset management. We'll take a look into some of these throughout the demo. And so in this, I'll highlight asset requests, asset reservations, asset disposals, and then contract management as well. Okay, so as we look into enterprise asset management, similar to any kind of asset, we can request that through a service catalog. And so from this section, we can take a look into any of these assets. And then from this point, we can order a ER kit. So once we go in to order this kit, we'll see this from the enterprise asset workspace, which is the back end manager view to view all of that asset data. So let me go ahead and refresh this. So once we see this request come in through the back end, we'll see the asset request populate. And then what we'll see here is that asset request for that ER medical kit. Okay, so as we can see, this is the ER medical kit. It is in waiting approval stage and the request number. So when we take a look into this, we can also go into procurement. We can assign a task to the procurement team. And from this, we'll see that this is pending approval. We can set dynamic approvals based on the cost of this asset. So because this is over $1,000, we have an approval sent to the manager. I'm going to go into bypass this approval. So once this is approved, what we'll see is a catalog task. And this is going to be a task for procurement. When we open this up, this is going to take us into a source request task. What we'll see here is any assets that are at a local stockroom, and then any transferable assets. So in this point, we have 10 from a different stockroom. And what we'll see is based off of these two stockrooms, we have 5 in stock in the stockroom East and stockroom West. And then so based off of this, we can go into designate which stockroom we want this to be transferred into. If there was no transferable stock, we could go in to create a new purchase order. But from this, we're going to generate a transfer order, and we'll see this new order populate here. So based off this workflow, we're going to see that we need to request this transfer order to the manager of that stockroom from stockroom East, prepare the shipment, and then once that stockroom manager has shipped it out, verify that we've received it in the San Diego stockroom. Okay, so once we open this up, we'll see a transfer order. A task will generate for this transfer order, and we'll see here that we need to fulfill this request. We can assign this to that manager at stockroom East, close out the task, and then continue through this workflow. So as we see here, once we've prepared it for fulfillment, we can go in to ship this. And then as we'll see here, we'll continue to go through that process. So once we've gone in to ship that asset, we can verify that we've received it from the San Diego stockroom, close out that task, and then assign this delivery to a technician or a field services member. And so at this point, we can see here whether the technician has delivered it successfully. Looking at that original request, what we'll see here as we've gone through the different tasks and close those out, all we need to do now is deploy that to that particular user who requested for this ER medical kit. And So that concludes the asset request function. Now let's take a look at asset incidents as well. So taking a look into the asset integration with IT service management, we can take a look into an incident with one of these assets here, and we can see here this is for an MRI. There's a problem with the quad head coil. When we open this up, what we'll see is all of the details for this particular incident, such as the location, who's the caller, the configuration item and asset associated to this, the asset action and swapped asset tab for the affected assets. And once we see the assets here, based off of the asset action, so in terms of this quad head coil that is missing, we can go into swap this. And based off of that particular location, as well as what is available, we'll get a list of all of the different quad head coils here. So we can choose one of these that are available. I'm going to take this 10653. And then from this point, we can also go into swap this out as well. But as we can see here, the data governance around this prevents writing to this field because we've chosen update and repair. So we can only add swapped assets if this asset action is swapped out, and that's due to the workflow behind this incident. Next part of the enterprise asset management overview, we can talk about loaner asset requests or reservations, which work very similarly. So in this process, we can take a look into some of the lifecycle workflows. So from the service catalog, a user can request an asset workflow such as the loaner request, complete that. Once that loaner request has been submitted, it'll filter through into this workspace. Once we open up this list, it'll provide us all of the different loaner asset requests. We can see here the model that's associated, the asset that needs to be swapped out, and then the stage of that task or stage of that loaner asset order. So in this case, I'm going to use this Freightliner Cascadia as an example. When we open up this loaner asset order, we'll see here the caller, what the location of this asset is, and then we'll see here, we can take a look at that asset tag, which is T10034. And so when we swap that out, we'll see that this is going to be back in our stock. So let's open up this asset task, in which case we need to prepare the new asset for this request. We'll see here the asset is T10034. When we search for a new record, all of the assets from that location, which have a substate of available, will show up. So only assets that are ready to be in use, nothing that is in use will be on this list. So once we put T10035, we can close out this task and prepare that asset. All right, so now that we've gone into prepare the asset, we can go into deploy. And what we'll see here is T10035. We can assign this to a field services technician. So now that we've closed out both the prepare and deploy task for this loaner asset request, what we'll see here is once we have this return date, a new task will generate to return back this asset. And we can also check on the asset that we previously swapped out. So taking a look into the asset estate, we can look at the asset tag. So for that Freightliner, when we open up this asset, we can review what happened to the asset through its audit trail. So notice how we can see here, based off of the asset, it is now back in stock rather than being in use with that particular caller. And then likewise, for the T10035 asset, that state of the asset will be in use. So the data governance around assets will be logged through this activity stream here so that we can have a full audit trail of what's happening to our assets. what location it's at, and who is using it. So next in our enterprise asset management overview, we can talk about model management. So one of the new things with enterprise asset management, just taking a look into one of these model forms here, we have provided 8 new model classes from the existing asset management functionality based off of those different industries as we see here. And then from one of these asset industries, taking a look into this medical cart model, what we'll see is the model type, which is new. So this can either be simple model, a consumable, or a multi-component model, like user assembled or pre-assembled, so we can determine whether it came assembled from the vendor. One of the points to highlight here, though, is based off of these multi-component models, based off of the child components, we can look into these different fields that are new to enterprise asset management. So hot swappable, this essentially means that this can be hot swapped based off of what assets are available. So even if this is an in-use asset, the asset is in use, we can still swap out that model. In terms of being repairable, we can also see here whether we need to repair, dispose, or swap. So in this case, if this was an asset we needed to swap out, rather than having to repair this model, we would just go in to order a new medical cart kit, because all of these are repairable is false. All right, so next we'll talk about lease management. So looking into one of these leases, what we'll see here is all of our different leases related to our assets. We'll see here that contract number, the vendor. These are all very similar to the existing contract management module in ServiceNow, but we've added this new UI for lease management in the workspace. When we take a look at one of these lease contracts, we'll see here all of the contract details, what kind of contract this is, whether it's a lease, the vendor, contract number, as well as any approvals or stakeholders related to the contract. Any financials we can add, as well as depreciation. And then in the assets covered column, we'll see all of the assets that wrap up into this contract and are covered here. And so in this case, even if this is not at expiry, we can begin the lease end process here. And this is just to expedite the leasing process. So as we can see here, once the lease end process has started, all of the assets will go into that action. We can't return back once we've submitted this for lease end. So as we can see here, the assets have changed from assets covered to lease end assets. And so each individual asset will have its own workflow that we need to determine. We can take a look into the asset, get that referenced record, take a look into the asset task. And then based off of the asset task, we'll get a few different actions involved. So in this planning task, what we'll see here is the lease action that we need to determine. So the 3 options here are either to return the lease asset to the vendor, extend that lease for that asset, or buy out the asset. So in this case, I'm going to close out this task as a returned asset lease. For the second asset in this contract, we can take a look into its asset task and add in a lease action for extend, and that will trigger a different workflow based off of that extend functionality. And so when we take a look at the details here, I won't go through every individual asset, but what we can see is the stage of the workflow differs based off of that lease action. So in this case, for 1001, we're in the collection stage as we need to collect that asset back, verify that it's working, and then return that back to the vendor. For an extended lease action, we'll extend that lease, and then that will follow through its own workflow. So as we can see here, based off of this stage, we can even see how that is affected by the lease action. From this first asset that we marked as return, based off of the return lease action, we can collect the asset. We can assign this to a technician or a stockroom manager. As we can see here, this is assigned to Betty, the asset manager. We'll close out this task. And as we can see here, we actually need to verify that the asset has been collected. So in this case, what we'll notice is that there's data governance around the different asset states, and to ensure that we have a full audit trail of what is being collected and what is being shipped out. So let's close out this task. And then the last asset task here is to prepare this asset. So we're preparing this for shipment. Once this has been prepared, we'll close out this task. And then what we'll see here is the stage is shipment, and then we'll return that and get confirmation that this has been returned. Any additional costs based off of damage to that leased asset, we can add into that last asset task. In terms of the lease action for extend and buyout, they'll have similar subtasks that need to be completed in order to walk through the entire lease process. And so we walked through the lease management process from return, extend, and buyout. And so this concludes the lease management lifecycle. Now that we've walked through asset request and asset reservation, let's walk through a disposal order. So any enterprise asset that's nearing its end of life or is faulty and needs to be disposed of, we can go in to see a disposal order here. So from this view, we'll get a list of all the different disposal orders, the stage of which this disposal order is at, where this is assigned to in terms of the stockroom and location, and then who the vendor is for. So let's open up one of these that are in draft. And so looking at the assets that need to be disposed of, what we'll see here are there these two vital sign monitors that are in stock and pending disposal. So once we open up this verify asset task, what we'll see is we need to verify those assets for disposal. We can check off all of the list of assets that are in the stockroom once we have verified. What we'll see here is once we click verify, the stage changes to verified. The state also gets marked as retired, and we can close out this task. So now that we verified that we have these assets in the stockroom, let's go ahead and schedule for pickup. From this point, we can list the vendor ID number, and then the scheduled pickup date, which I'll mark as today. Once we schedule that for pickup, we'll verify from that contact that they have picked it up. These are on the way to the disposal vendor, and then we can close out this task. So as we can see here, based off of the update, we need to verify that these have departed. And so from the disposal assets list, we'll click on depart. We'll see here that the stage changes to in transit, and this is still pending disposal because it has not reached the disposal vendor yet. Once we close out this task, we'll see that we can confirm that the vendor has properly disposed of this from both our team and the vendor. And once we do this, we'll close out the task. We can attach any vendor confirmation certificates, close out this task. And then we'll see here an additional task for disposal documentation. And so this is also where you can submit the certification of data destruction. And this is important for any sensitive data that is on any of the assets or has any material that is government regulated. And then we'll close out the rest of this disposal order. So once we've done that, what we'll see is the stage will move from documentation to closed. And so that concludes the disposal order for enterprise asset management. And as we can see, we've walked through a enterprise asset request, a loaner reservation for an enterprise asset, and then a disposal order. The last thing I want to touch on in this overview is the asset audit. And so based off of asset audits, this can be done either through the browser or through mobile capabilities. We can have multiple technicians doing an audit for a particular stockroom or location. And then based off of the expected assets, using the barcode scanning capability on the agent app, we can find all of the assets and reconcile the asset audit until it's marked as complete. And so all the data that's processed through the different workflows, what we'll see is based off of the different workflows, we can pull reports together for the asset counts by model category, asset counts by the lifecycle state. And then as we take a look into these different reports, we can see here assets eligible for tag refresh based off of that end of life or end of support date, and determine here what may need to go through an upgrade. All right, so in terms of the enterprise asset overview, we walk through an enterprise asset request. So the last thing that we're looking through for this enterprise asset overview is the enterprise inventory stock order, which is another workflow to replenish stock in a particular location or stock room. So from this catalog item, we'll have to populate a model that we want to replenish. In this case, this is the ultrasound system. We'll say we want 5. And we can say we want this in the stockroom east. So any comments that need to be added can be populated. Once we have completed that, let's go in to order this. And just taking a look into the stage of this order, what we'll see is based off of the price, there might be certain approvals that are triggered. Once that's approved, this will go through fulfillment. We can see if there is a particular stockroom that already has it existing, or if we need to go in to purchase this. What we'll see here is the stock order has populated into our dashboard for the enterprise asset workspace. This is a procurement request. So based off of the user, they may have access to this board of all the different procurement requests. And this is very similar to the original asset request for that ER medical kit earlier from this demo. Once we go in to approve of any triggered approvals, we'll see here that the catalog task for procurement will generate. And then once we open this up, we can see here this is the source request that is assigned to the procurement group. And once we source this request, what we'll see is based off of the existing data, whether we have transferable stock from an existing stock room or we need to purchase this directly from the vendor. What we'll see here is we'll need to reach out to Samsung, order this, and this will generate a PO for us to process. So once we go into source this from procurement, a purchase order will be generated. Similar to the original asset requests earlier on in this demo, what we saw earlier was a transfer order. The other process that we see here is a purchase order. And so it'd be very similar where we would order the equipment, a technician would verify that we've received it, generate the asset tags and serial numbers as needed, and then deploy these ultrasounds to that stockroom east as requested. And so very similar workflow here in the sense that we assign the tasks to approve, fulfill from procurement, and then a technician receives those assets in the stockroom and awaits delivery. And so that concludes the demo for the inventory stock order. And this concludes the high-level overview of the enterprise asset management solution that is coming on the Tokyo release of the ServiceNow platform. The intention of enterprise asset management is to maximize your asset utilization, manage aging assets and infrastructure, resolve issues before they happen, monitor assets intelligently and centralize that information, and then elevate that maintenance management while consolidating all your operational applications. Enterprise asset management is going to impact your business by getting full visibility into your critical enterprise assets while revolutionizing and standardizing your asset processes as your business continues to scale. For more information on enterprise asset management, please visit our product documentation site on enterprise asset management and what's new on the Tokyo release. Thanks and have a great day.